My name is Alara Vance. For the past 15 years, I have lived a life cleaved in two. In one life, the one my family knows, I am the quiet, unassuming daughter who runs a small, vaguely defined consultancy from a modest apartment in the quieter part of Port Blossom. I am the reliable, if uninspired, sibling who never quite seemed to find her footing after graduating with honors, a quiet disappointment they've learned to tolerate with a sort of fond pity. In the other life, the one I built for myself in the silent hours before dawn and the long nights after the city went to sleep, I am the founder and CEO of Acacia Strategy, one of the most sought-after corporate advisory firms on the West Coast. My apartment is not modest. It is a penthouse overlooking the harbor, a sanctuary of clean lines and quiet light that I purchased with the first major dividend my company paid out. The tiny firm is a multi-story glass building downtown, filled with the brightest minds I could find. I never intended for these two worlds to collide. I guarded their separation fiercely, not out of shame, but for my own preservation. My success was a garden I had cultivated in private, away from the trampling feet of family expectations and the withering shade of their comparisons. It needed space to grow, and my family, for all their love, had always been a landscape of rocky soil and unpredictable weather. This dual existence had become a comfortable rhythm, a carefully managed performance. But today, at my brother Leo's wedding, the curtain was about to be torn down, and I knew, with a deep and unsettling certainty, that the stage would never be the same again. The Crystal Pavilion at Seabrook Estate was a masterpiece of ostentatious elegance, a glass cathedral dedicated to the worship of wealth and status. It was exactly the kind of place Leo would choose. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, glinting off 1,000 suspended crystals and illuminating the extravagant floral arrangements that scented the air with lilies and hyacinths. It was beautiful, in the way a perfectly cut diamond is beautiful, flawless, cold, and impossibly hard. I smoothed down the silk of my dress, a simple column of deep sea green that had felt like a quiet statement of self in my apartment, but now felt conspicuously plain amidst the jewel-toned satin and structured couture of the other guests. I had chosen it for that very reason. It was a shield, a way to blend into the background, to observe without being too closely observed. For years, I had perfected the art of being present but unnoticed at family gatherings. It was a survival skill. My grandmother, the only one who had ever truly seen me, had given me a small, silver locket before she passed away. It was cool against my skin now, a familiar weight beneath my dress. She had held my hand, her papery skin warm, and said, "Some plants, my dear Alara, must learn to flourish in the shade before they are strong enough for the sun." The locket was engraved with a single, tiny acacia sprig on the back, our secret. My entire company, my entire life, was named for that quiet moment of understanding. A familiar voice, sharp with a practiced social grace, cut through my reverie. "Alara, there you are, hiding in the corners again. You must come and mingle." My mother glided towards me, a vision in pale champagne lace, her smile perfectly in place, but her eyes conducting a swift, critical inventory of my appearance. The sea green dress, the minimal jewelry, the simple twist of my hair. I saw the familiar flicker of disappointment. "I was just admiring the view, Mom," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "The view is lovely, but the people are what matter, dear," she replied, her gaze sweeping the room. "Look at your brother. He knows everyone. Youngest vice president in the history of Evergreen Holdings. Marrying the CEO's daughter. Now that," she squeezed my arm, a gesture that was meant to be affectionate but felt like a correction, "is how you build a life." I took a slow sip of my water, the bubbles fizzing on my tongue. I thought of the quarterly report sitting on my desk, the one detailing Acacia's 30% growth and the final stages of our most ambitious project to date, the acquisition of a struggling, legacy corporation. A corporation called Evergreen Holdings. "I'm happy for him," I said, and it was true. I was happy for his happiness, even if I found the foundation of it to be as fragile as the spun sugar on the dessert table. "My work is fulfilling. It keeps me busy." She sighed, a delicate, theatrical sound. "Oh, Alara. Busy is what you say when you have nothing else to say. It's not the same as being successful. We just worry, that's all. Your father and I, we want you to be secure." Secure. To them, security was a corporate ladder, a prestigious title, a wealthy spouse. It was a visible, quantifiable thing. My security was different. It was the quiet confidence of knowing I could depend entirely on myself. It was the knowledge that my name on a contract held more weight than my brother's entire resume. It was a strength they couldn't see, so to them, it didn't exist. Before I could formulate a gentle reply, Leo himself appeared, his arm draped possessively around his new bride, Claire. He was beaming, his face flushed with champagne and triumph. He looked like a man who had just won the grand prize and wanted to make sure everyone saw him holding the trophy. "Ellie, there's my little sister," he boomed, using the childhood nickname no one else had used in 20 years. It was his way of reminding me of my place, of the pecking order established in our youth. "Still playing the wallflower, I see. Some things never change." Claire, radiant in a gown that probably cost more than my first car, gave me a smile that was all perfectly whitened teeth and no warmth. "Leo's told me so much about your little consulting business. It's just wonderful that you have a passion project. So brave." The condescension was so finely veiled it was almost artful. I felt the familiar heat rise in my chest, a dull, aching anger I had learned to smother long ago. I remembered the nights I'd spent poring over business plans while Leo was out with his friends, the loans I'd taken out in my own name after my father refused to co-sign, telling me it was too risky and I should find a nice, stable company to work for. The same father who had mortgaged their home to fund Leo's disastrous attempt at a tech startup a few years later. "It's more than a passion project," I said, my voice steady. "But I'm glad you think it's brave." Leo laughed, a loud, hearty sound that drew the attention of a few nearby guests. "Oh, she's a serious businesswoman now." "Don't you worry, Ellie, we all have to start somewhere. It's not easy out there." "I know. But hey, at least you can say you did it all by yourself, right? No matter how small." His words, meant to sound like a compliment, were expertly crafted daggers, each one hitting a mark he couldn't even see. He was performing for his audience, cementing his image as the successful, magnanimous older brother, indulging his quirky, less fortunate sister. I felt the cool metal of my grandmother's locket again, a silent anchor in the swirling current of their judgment. Flourish in the shade. I had grown into a forest while they were admiring their single, manicured tree. "Success isn't always loud, Leo," I murmured, more to myself than to them. He waved a dismissive hand. "Whatever you say, sis. Speaking of loud success, you'll never guess who's coming to the reception tonight. Arthur Finch himself. The CEO of Evergreen. He never comes to employee functions. Never. But he's coming for me. For my wedding." He puffed out his chest, his pride so immense it was almost a physical presence. Claire's father arranged it, of course. I knew exactly why Arthur Finch was attending. He wasn't coming for Leo. He was coming, I suspected, for a final, informal chat with me. We had been in negotiations for weeks, our video calls and emails growing more frequent as Evergreen's financial situation grew more precarious. He was a shrewd, old-school leader trapped by a board of directors clinging to the past. He saw the acquisition by my firm, Acacia Strategy, as his company's only viable path forward. I had agreed to his final terms just yesterday morning, but the official announcement was slated for Monday. He had requested one last conversation to, in his words, shake the hand of the woman who was about to save us. He had no idea we'd be shaking hands at his star employee's wedding. "That's quite an honor," I said, a genuine smile finally touching my lips. The irony was a delicious, private feast. "It is," Leo said, his tone dropping to one of mock seriousness. "So please, try not to do anything to embarrass me when he gets here. He's my future, Ellie. Just stay in the background. Enjoy the free champagne." He and Claire shared a look, a quick, silent communication of pity and superiority, before they moved on, swallowed back into the glittering crowd. I stood alone for a moment, the sea-green dress feeling less like a shield and more like a disguise. I watched my brother, my handsome, charming, celebrated brother, who had no idea that the future he was so desperate to impress was about to be handed to him by the very sister he'd just dismissed. A subtle shift in the room's atmosphere, a sudden lowering of the collective chatter, signaled a new arrival. I turned my head and saw him. Arthur Finch stood at the entrance, his presence commanding the space without any overt effort. He was just as I'd seen him on screen, tall and lean, with a full head of silver hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He radiated a quiet authority that made Leo's preening look childish by comparison. Leo straightened his tie, grabbing Claire's hand. This was his moment. He began to move forward, a path magically clearing before him as guests parted, sensing the convergence of power. But before Leo could take more than 3 steps, Arthur Finch's sharp eyes scanned the room, bypassing the sea of adoring faces. They swept past my brother, past my parents who were watching with bated breath, and landed directly on me. A slow smile of recognition spread across his face. "Ms. Vance," he called out, his voice a rich baritone that carried easily across the suddenly hushed room. He changed his trajectory, striding not towards the groom, but towards the unassuming woman in the simple green dress hiding near the windows. "What a delightful surprise. I had no idea you'd be here." Leo froze. I could practically feel the gears in his mind grinding to a halt. His face was a perfect portrait of confusion. Claire's manicured hand tightened on his arm, her own smile faltering. Mr. Finch reached me, extending a hand not in a casual greeting, but with a palpable sense of respect. "I hope my presence isn't an intrusion. I know we have our formal meeting on Monday, but I couldn't pass up the chance to thank you in person." My mother's gasp was a small, sharp sound. My father, standing beside her, looked as if he'd been struck. I could feel every eye in the room on us, a heavy, inquisitive weight. I took Mr. Finch's hand. It was warm and firm. "Mr. Finch," I said, my voice clear and calm. "The surprise is all mine. I never thought our paths would cross here." I glanced pointedly at my brother, who was still standing motionless a few feet away. It's not every day you run into the CEO of Evergreen Holdings at your brother's wedding. Understanding, complete and sudden, dawned in Arthur Finch's eyes. He looked from me to Leo, then back to me, a flicker of wry amusement in his expression. "Wait," he said, his voice dropping slightly. "Leo Vance, he's your brother?" "He is," I confirmed, allowing myself a small, genuine smile as I watched the color drain from Leo's face. He was finally connecting the dots, the horrible, impossible algebra of the situation unfolding in his mind. Alara. Ms. Vance. Acacia strategy. Acquisition. The silence in the Crystal Pavilion was absolute. It was so profound I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning. My mother's hand, holding her champagne flute, began to tremble. My father's jaw was slack with disbelief. But it was Leo's face that held the story. It was a kaleidoscope of emotions, bewilderment giving way to dawning horror, embarrassment bleeding into raw, naked panic. He had just spent the better part of his wedding day belittling and mocking the one person who held his entire professional future in the palm of her hand. Arthur Finch, ever the diplomat, cleared his throat. "Your brother? Forgive me, but he told us his sister ran a small, local project." "That's what everyone thought," I said, my gaze sweeping over my family, my voice carrying in the stillness. I found it was easier not to correct them. Claire's champagne flute slipped from her nerveless fingers. It hit the polished marble floor with a sharp, explosive crash that shattered the silence into 1,000 pieces. The sound was like a starting gun. A wave of murmurs and whispers rippled through the crowd. But I wasn't listening. My attention was fixed on my brother, on my parents. I was watching the world they had so carefully constructed, with its clear hierarchies and designated roles, crumble to dust around them. I had never planned this. I had never wanted a public confrontation, a dramatic reveal. I had only wanted peace. But as I stood there, bathed in the brilliant, unforgiving light of the Crystal Pavilion, watching the foundations of my family's perception of me shatter like Claire's wine glass, I realized that some truths don't ask for a convenient time to appear. They simply arrive. And this, I knew, was not an ending. It was a beginning. The moments that followed were a surreal tableau of frantic, whispered conversations and panicked glances. The wedding reception, Leo's magnum opus of self-congratulation, had devolved into a stage for our family's private drama, and everyone had a front-row seat. My mother, a master of damage control, was the first to recover. She rushed to my side, her face a mask of frantic cheerfulness. "Alara, darling. CEO of Acacia Strategy. Why on earth didn't you tell us? We would have thrown a party." Her laughter was brittle. I took a deliberate, slow sip of water, letting the silence stretch. You never asked, Mom, I said, my voice gentle but firm. You were all so focused on Leo's promotions at Evergreen, there wasn't much room to discuss my little project. Arthur Finch, caught in the crossfire, had the good grace to look both intrigued and deeply apologetic. Ms. Vance, I am so sorry. I wouldn't have. If I had known this was a family matter for you, I would have been more discreet. Perhaps we should postpone our discussion about the merger. Merger. The word shot out of Leo's mouth, raw and strangled. He finally unfroze, stumbling forward and grabbing my arm. His grip was surprisingly strong, his fingers digging into my skin. What merger? I carefully, deliberately, detached his hand from my arm, my gaze never leaving his. The one where Acacia Strategy finalizes its acquisition of Evergreen Holdings, I stated, keeping my voice level and clear. I then turned to Mr. Finch. Though, after tonight's reception, I'm beginning to reconsider the cultural fit. The leadership team at Evergreen seems to have some misconceptions. Leo went white as a sheet. Claire, his bride, looked between me and her father-in-law-to-be, her perfectly painted lips parted in a silent O of horror. But if you acquire Evergreen, that would make you, Leo stammered, his mind failing to compute the unthinkable. Your boss, I finished for him, the words hanging in the air between us. Well, more accurately, the ultimate authority several levels above your direct boss. Yes, life is full of surprises, isn't it? My father finally found his footing, pushing through the small crowd of onlookers that had gathered. His face was flushed, a mixture of anger and deep, profound confusion. Now, just hold on a minute, Alara. This is your brother's wedding day. You can't just march in here and make these outrageous claims. Mr. Finch cleared his throat, stepping forward slightly to address my father directly. His tone was deferential but unwavering. Sir, with all due respect, your daughter is precisely who she says she is. Acacia Strategy is not just a leading firm, it's a market shaper. Ms. Vance built it from nothing. We at Evergreen have been pursuing this merger for the better part of a year. It is our company's best and only path to solvency. The word solvency struck my father like a physical blow. He was a man who understood balance sheets and bottom lines. The full, terrifying scope of the situation began to settle on his face. This wasn't a childish prank or a sister's jealous fantasy. This was a corporate reality he couldn't deny. My mother, however, was stuck on a different detail. But the money, she whispered, her eyes wide. All those times we asked for help? The condo down payment for Leo? You always said you were just getting by. The memory, sharp and bitter, rose unbidden. Oh, you mean the $75,000 I loaned you from my personal savings for Leo's down payment? I kept my voice quiet, but it was laced with the steel of a 15-year-old wound. The loan you assured me would be paid back, but then later told me to consider a gift because, and I quote, Leo needs a solid start, and your life is so much simpler. I remember. Claire, looking faint, took a wobbly step toward her new husband. Leo? Did you know any of this? About her company? Of course not, he snapped, his voice cracking. He tried to gather the tattered remnants of his pride. This is ridiculous. Alara, she's always been dramatic. She's probably exaggerating. Arthur Finch raised a single, eloquent eyebrow. Mr. Vance, the only exaggeration I've witnessed tonight has been the perception of your own professional standing. Forgive my frankness, but Acacia Strategy's net worth is greater than Evergreen's total market capitalization. Your sister isn't just successful, she's in a different league entirely. The ballroom had fallen into a reverent, awestruck silence. The string quartet had stopped playing. The waiters stood frozen with their silver trays. Leo's perfect wedding had become a public audit of his life, and the numbers were not in his favor. I believe, I said softly, breaking the spell, that this conversation would be better suited to a more private setting. I gave a small, apologetic nod to Mr. Finch. Arthur, would you excuse me for a few moments? I need to speak with my family. He inclined his head, a gesture of complete understanding. Of course, Ms. Vance. Take all the time you need. I turned and walked towards a small, private library off the main hall, not waiting to see if they would follow. I knew they would. I heard their footsteps behind me, my mother's quick, nervous clicks, my father's heavy, reluctant tread, and Leo's unsteady shuffle. I closed the heavy oak door behind us, sealing us in with the scent of old leather and the suffocating weight of unspoken truths. The silence in the small room was heavier, more charged, than the silence in the ballroom. It was a vacuum, waiting for the first crack of thunder. It was Leo who broke it. How could you? He finally exploded, his voice a raw whisper of fury and betrayal. How could you do this to me? On my wedding day? Couldn't you have let me have this one day? This one thing. A laugh escaped me, dry and humorless. One thing? Leo, your entire life has been a collection of one things given to you. Dad's connections got you the internship at Evergreen. Mom cashed in her bonds to pay for your MBA. My savings, the money I earned from my first freelance contracts, the seed money for my little project, paid for your condo. Meanwhile, I was working until 3 a.m. in a rented cubicle, building something real with my own two hands on my own merit. We were trying to protect you, my mother insisted, her hands twisting the delicate fabric of her dress. The business world, it's a difficult place for a woman. We didn't want you to be disappointed. No, Mom, I said, turning to face her. The gentleness was gone from my voice, replaced by a profound, weary clarity. You weren't protecting me. You were underestimating me. You were dismissing me. Every single time I tried to share a victory, you would pivot the conversation back to Leo. Every milestone I reached was met with a pat on the head and a gentle suggestion that I find a husband. You didn't see me. You saw a problem to be solved, a daughter to be settled. My father stepped forward, his businessman's composure finally returning. Alara, let's be rational. We're family. There's no need for this hostility. I'm sure we can come to an arrangement that is mutually beneficial. The phrase hung in the air, cold and transactional. Mutually beneficial? I repeated, my voice dangerously soft. You mean now that you know I'm powerful, you want a seat at the table? The table you never even acknowledged I was building. I shook my head slowly. The merger with Evergreen was a strategic decision, but also a professional courtesy to Arthur Finch. He's a good man steering a sinking ship. But after tonight, my eyes found Leo's. I'm realizing the rot in the company goes deeper than the balance sheet. It's in the culture. The culture that promotes people like you. You can't do this, Leo whispered, his arrogance finally shattering completely, leaving behind a terrified young man. My job, my reputation, my future. Your reputation was built on a lie, Leo. A lie we all, myself included, allowed you to believe, I said. You've lost Evergreen's 2 largest accounts in the last 18 months. The only reason you weren't fired was because of Claire's father's position on the board. I smoothed the front of my simple green dress. It no longer felt plain, it felt like armor. But don't worry. When Acacia takes over, everyone will be reassessed. We will find a role for you. One that is commensurate with your actual skills and qualifications. Claire let out a choked sob. My father is on the board. He won't let you do this. Your father, I said, my tone softening into something almost regretful, called me personally last week to implore me to see this deal through. Evergreen is leveraged to the hilt, and Acacia's strategy is its only lifeline. He is fully aware of, and in agreement with, my plans for a complete corporate restructuring. The finality of those words seemed to suck the remaining air from the room. Leo's legs buckled, and he sank into a leather armchair, his head in his hands. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a kind of dazed wonder. All this time, we were laughing at you, making jokes about your little firm, and you were building an empire. I tried to tell you, I said, my voice thick with the memory of 100 rebuffed attempts. All of you. Every holiday, every birthday call. But you were never listening. You were too busy polishing the trophy of your son's success to notice the quiet work being done in the next room. I walked to the door, my hand resting on the cool brass knob. Well, the truth is out now. And nothing will be the same. Alara, please, my mother cried out, her voice breaking. We're still your family. I paused, my back to them. Family? I turned slowly, my gaze sweeping over their stricken faces. Family shows up. Family listens. Family champions you, especially when no one else does. You weren't my family when I was crying in my car after my first big client backed out. You weren't my family when I signed the lease for my first real office with trembling hands. You chose, time and again, not to be part of my struggle. I took a deep breath. You don't get to claim membership for the victory parade. With that, I opened the door and walked back into the dazzling light of the reception. The The low hum of conversation ceased as I emerged. I saw Arthur Finch standing by the bar, watching me with a look of profound empathy. He pushed himself off the bar and met me halfway. "Shall we find a quiet corner to discuss the new terms of the merger, Ms. Vance?" he asked, his voice a low, respectful murmur. I nodded, a faint, tired smile on my lips. "Yes, Arthur. I believe it's time to reshape Evergreen Holdings." Starting from the very top. As we walked towards a quieter part of the pavilion to discuss the future, I could feel the weight of my family's stares on my back. They were still in the library, standing amidst the wreckage of their own assumptions. The simple sea green dress no longer felt like a disguise or armor. It just felt like me. They had spent a lifetime looking at me, but tonight, for the very first time, they were finally seeing me. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that their education had only just begun. The weeks following the wedding were a quiet storm. My phone, usually a tool for business, became a vessel for my family's chaotic emotional fallout. A barrage of texts and voicemails arrived daily, each a different flavor of desperation. Moms were pleading, "Alara, darling, we miss you. Let's have lunch, just the three of us." Dads were pragmatic and vaguely threatening, "Your brother is a wreck. This is having a serious effect on his health. We need to resolve this." Leo's were a volatile mix of anger and pathetic entreaties, "You've ruined my life. We need to talk about my role. Call me." Even Claire sent a stiff, formal text, "My father would like to arrange a meeting with you at your earliest convenience." I didn't answer a single one. It wasn't cruelty, it was necessity. I was erecting a boundary, a wall of silence, to give myself the space to process, to breathe, and to steer the two colossal ships of my company and my life without their frantic hands on the helm. My true work, the work that had defined me for 15 years, required my full attention. I had a merger to execute. The day of the official Evergreen Holdings board meeting arrived cloaked in the cool gray mist of a port blossom morning. I stood before the panoramic window of my office at the top of the Acacia Tower. The city was spread out below me, a tapestry of light and shadow. I wasn't wearing sea green silk today. I was in a bespoke charcoal gray suit, the fabric sharp and precise, the cut conveying an authority that was earned, not borrowed. This was my uniform, the armor of the other Alara, the one they were only just beginning to know. My executive assistant, Maya, knocked softly on my office door. She was my gatekeeper, my confidant, the first person I had ever hired, and she knew more about my two lives than anyone. "Ms. Vance," she said, her expression calm but her eyes sympathetic. "Your brother is in the lobby. Again. This is the third time this week." I sighed, a long, slow exhale, and glanced at the sleek watch on my wrist. "The board meeting is in an hour. Send him in, Maya. It's time to deal with this." Leo entered my office, and the change in him was startling. The cocksure, polished VP was gone. In his place was a man who looked lost and frayed at the edges. His expensive suit was rumpled, his hair was unkempt, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He looked around my office, at the minimalist art, the custom-built oak desk, the sweeping view of the harbor, with a look of stunned awe, as if seeing for the first time the scale of the world I inhabited. "Alara, please," he began, his voice raspy. "You have to stop this. You can't just dismantle Evergreen. My whole life, everything I've worked for." "Sit down, Leo," I said, my voice even. I remained standing, a subtle but clear affirmation of the new dynamic. "You're not here to negotiate the terms of the merger. That's already done. What are you here for?" He ran a hand through his messy hair, a gesture of pure desperation. "I was a fool. I know that. At the wedding, and for years before that. I was arrogant, and I was cruel. But you can't take my job away. It's all I have. Is it?" I asked quietly. "Or is it just all you've ever been given? Your job, your title, your condo, your confidence. They were gifts, Leo, handed to you by people who wanted to make your path easy." I finally moved, walking around the desk to lean against its edge, closer to him. "Do you want to know what's not fair? It's not fair that I had to hide every success so I wouldn't make my own family uncomfortable. It's not fair that my biggest achievements were met with silence, while your smallest steps were celebrated with parades. It's not fair that I had to become a stranger to my own family in order to become myself." "I'm sorry," he whispered, and his eyes were shining with what looked like genuine tears. For the first time in his life, he looked truly humbled. I'm so sorry, Ellie. Sorrow is a start, Leo. But it doesn't rewrite history, and it doesn't change the fundamentals of business. I glanced at my watch again. The board meeting to finalize the transition begins in 55 minutes. My decision is made. What's going to happen to me? He asked, his voice small. I studied him, my brother, this man I had known my whole life yet was only just meeting. That, for the first time, is entirely up to you, I said. Acacia values talent, innovation, and hard work. Not titles, not connections. The organizational chart is being completely redrawn. If you want a place in the new company, you will have to earn it. Truly earn it. His face went pale. What does that mean? Start over. It means you would be offered a position in an entry-level rotational program, I said, letting the words land. You would learn the business from the ground up. Sales, logistics, client relations, finance. No shortcuts. No special treatment. You'll report to a manager who is younger than you and who got there on merit. I held up a hand as he opened his mouth to protest. It's that or a generous severance package. The choice is yours. Before he could respond, the heavy glass door to my office swung open with a force that made us both jump. My parents stood there, having bypassed Maya's attempts to stop them, their faces etched with a week's worth of anxiety. Alara, my mother began, her voice trembling. We have been calling you nonstop. Why won't you speak to us? I've been busy, Mom, I replied, my tone cool but not unkind. Running my tiny firm is quite demanding. My father, ever the pragmatist, stepped forward, his expression grave. Honey, we understand you're upset. But you cannot let a family squabble destroy your brother's career. It's not right. A family squabble? A humorless laugh escaped my lips. Is that what you call 2 decades of systemic dismissal? An entire childhood of being told my ambitions were cute, while his were critical. We made mistakes, my mother conceded, wringing her hands. We didn't understand. But family is family. That has to mean something. I walked back behind my desk and opened a drawer. I pulled out a framed photograph, setting it on the polished surface for them to see. It was the last family portrait we had taken together, about a year before I founded Acacia. My parents and Leo were in the center, smiling brightly. I was on the edge, slightly apart from them, my smile small and strained, a lonely island in their sea of togetherness. Family meant something when I came to you with my business plan and asked for a small loan, and you laughed it off, I said, my voice low and filled with the ghosts of old hurts. Family meant something when I was working 2 jobs to fund my dream, eating instant noodles for dinner, and you were taking Leo on a celebratory trip to Europe for landing his first promotion. Family meant something all those years I needed you. I tapped the glass of the photo frame. You can't just decide it means something to you now because the power dynamic has shifted. A soft knock came at the door. It was Maya. Ms. Vance, the board members are gathering in the main conference room. I stood up, adjusting the jacket of my suit. Thank you, Maya. I'm on my way. I turned my gaze back to the 3 frozen figures in my office. You are welcome to wait here. The meeting will be broadcast on the monitor. I think you might find it illuminating. The Evergreen Holdings boardroom was a cavern of mahogany and hushed tension. The air was thick with resentment and fear. As I walked to the head of the table, where Arthur Finch stood to greet me, a profound silence fell. All eyes were on me. Ms. Vance, Arthur said with a nod. The floor is yours. For the next hour, I didn't just present a plan, I laid out a new reality. With cool precision and undeniable logic, supported by data-driven projections and market analysis, I deconstructed the old evergreen and unveiled the blueprint for the new. Department by department, I detailed the coming changes, the redundancies, the new initiatives, the overhaul of the company's core philosophy from one of stagnant legacy to one of dynamic growth. Through the glass wall of the conference room, I could see my office. My family was huddled around the large monitor, watching. Leo sat slumped in a chair, his head in his hands. My parents stood behind him, rigid and pale, the full, breathtaking scale of my world finally, irrevocably, laid bare before them. When the meeting concluded, the room was divided. Half the board members looked shell-shocked, their comfortable world upended. The other half, including Arthur Finch, looked energized, hopeful. A masterclass, Alara, Arthur said to me quietly as the others filed out. frank, fair, and visionary. I have to ask, your brother. If he accepts the offer, he'll be treated like any other new hire in the rotational program, I assured him. He will be given a fair chance to succeed or fail on his own merits. Arthur nodded, a look of respect in his eyes. You are a more generous person than I might have been. This isn't about revenge, Arthur, I said, gathering my files. It's about building something that lasts. You can't do that on a rotten foundation. When I returned to my office, they were still there, silent and subdued. They looked smaller now, the formidable parental authority and fraternal arrogance that had shaped my youth stripped away, leaving only 3 ordinary, flawed people. So, Leo said, his voice barely a whisper. That's it? Everything just changes. Everything changed a long time ago, Leo, I replied gently. You all just refuse to see it. I turned to my parents. The new employment contracts and severance options from HR will be sent out tomorrow. I suggest you both advise Leo to read his offer very carefully. Alara. My mother took a hesitant step forward, tears welling in her eyes. We were so wrong. About everything. We were blind. Her voice broke. Is there no way for us to start over? I looked at her, at the genuine pain in her face, and felt a pang of the old, familiar love, now tangled with years of hurt. I thought about what starting over would mean. It would mean pretending the scars weren't there. Starting over implies forgetting, I said finally, the words coming slowly as I found their truth. And I don't want to forget. Those years you dismissed me, those years I felt invisible in my own family, they weren't for nothing. They taught me how to rely on myself. They gave me the quiet space to build this. I gestured to the room, to the city beyond the window. They made me who I am. And who are you? My father asked, his voice soft with a new, fragile curiosity. I am the woman who built a billion-dollar company in the shade you cast, I said, my voice steady and clear. I'm the CEO who just acquired the corporation you held up as the pinnacle of success. And I am the daughter who has finally learned that her value is not, and has never been, subject to her family's approval. I walked towards the elevator, then paused at the threshold and looked back at them one last time. The offer will be on the table for Leo. The choice of what to do next belongs to him. To all of you. As the polished steel doors of the elevator slid shut, I caught a final glimpse of them, 3 people standing in the heart of the empire I had built, finally seeing me. Not as a disappointment, not as a problem, but as the architect of their new reality. That evening, I stood on the balcony of my penthouse. The city lights glittered below like a fallen constellation. I took out my grandmother's locket and held it in my palm, its silver cool and smooth against my skin. I didn't need to open it. I knew the tiny, engraved acacia sprig was there. Flourish in the shade. A sense of profound, quiet peace washed over me. It wasn't the fiery thrill of victory or the bitter satisfaction of revenge. It was something deeper, calmer. It was the feeling of standing, at long last, fully in the sun, not because someone else had granted me permission, but because I had grown tall enough to reach it on my own. My family's journey was just beginning. But mine, the real one, had brought me home to myself.